Before we dive into tonight's tale, make sure to hit that subscribe button if you want more creepy stories that will keep you up at night. Picture Miami Beach on a night that feels like the world's holding its breath. The air's thick with salt and panic, and the neon signs along Ocean Drive flicker like they're struggling to stay alive. Sirens wail, slicing through the darkness, their high-pitched screams bouncing off the pastel facades of Art Deco hotels. They're warning of a toxic spill in the ocean, something bad enough to make the authorities order a full evacuation. The streets are a mess, people shoving past each other, dragging suitcases, shouting into phones, their voices swallowed by the chaos. Car horns blare, tires screech, and somewhere in the distance a police megaphone barks orders that no one's really listening to. It's a scene straight out of a disaster flick, but for five strangers caught in the heart of it, this is no movie. This is real, and it's about to get a whole lot worse. Lila Torres weaves through the crowd, her boots scuffing against the sandy pavement. She's 28, a journalist with a nose for truth and a chip on her shoulder from years of being underestimated. Her dark hair's pulled back in a messy bun, strands sticking to her sweaty neck as she grips her camera like it's her lifeline. The lens sweeps across the chaos, families clutching kids, tourists abandoning luggage, a guy in a tank top yelling at a cop. Lila's sharp eyes dart from face to face, searching for something the news isn't saying. She's been haunted by her mom's disappearance at sea 10 years ago, a wound that never closed, and tonight her gut's screaming that this spill is no accident. "Come on, give me something," she mutters under her breath, adjusting the focus. The camera's screen flickers, and for a split second she catches a glimpse of something. A shadowy figure, humanoid but wrong, standing in the ocean mist just beyond the breakers. Her heart slams against her ribs. She blinks, shakes the camera. It's gone. Just a glitch, she tells herself, but her hands tremble as she keeps filming, the salty breeze stinging her eyes. A few blocks away, inside the Azure Wave Hotel, Marcus Reed is fighting a losing battle against the tide of panicked guests. He's 45, a security guard with a gravelly voice and a face etched with hard years. His navy uniform's wrinkled, and the faint whiff of whiskey clings to him, a secret he thinks no one notices. The lobby's a madhouse, people shoving toward the exits, their suitcases knocking over potted palms. Marcus plants himself by the revolving doors, his broad shoulders squared, barking orders. "One at a time, folks. Keep it calm." His voice cuts through the din, but his mind's elsewhere, gnawing on the fight he had with his teenage son, Ethan, last week. Another missed call from him sits unanswered on Marcus's phone, and the guilt twists like a knife. A woman in a sundress nearly bowls him over, and he catches her arm, steadying her. "Easy, ma'am. You'll get out." She nods, wild-eyed, and stumbles into the night. Marcus wipes sweat from his brow, his jaw tight, trying to shove down the thought that he's failing everyone, his son, these people, himself. Nearby, Sofia Alvarez hovers by the lobby's edge, her sneakers squeaking on the polished marble floor. She's 19, a barista with a quiet strength that's holding her together, barely. Her hands tremble as she clutches her phone, the screen dark, no signal, no word from her younger sister, Mia. Sofia stayed behind when the evacuation started, refusing to leave without her. Mia was last seen near the hotel's basement, helping with a delivery, and Sofia's been replaying her sister's wide, scared eyes in her mind all night. She spots Marcus across the lobby and weaves toward him, dodging a man dragging a golf bag. "Sir, please," she says, her voice soft but urgent. "My sister, Mia, she's still here somewhere. The basement, maybe." Marcus turns, his tired eyes softening for a moment. "Basement's locked down, kid. Too risky." Sofia's face crumples, but she nods, biting her lip. "I can't leave without her," she whispers, more to herself, her fingers tightening around Mia's beaded bracelet on her wrist, its colors faded from years of wear. In the corner of the lobby, Dr. Alan Kessler stands out like a sore thumb. He's 60, a biochemist with a smug air that doesn't quite hide his nerves. His gray suit's immaculate, but his knuckles are white around the handle of his briefcase. He's been dodging questions about the spill all night, his shifty gaze flicking to the exits like he's calculating his odds. A disgraced scientist, he's got secrets buried deeper than the ocean floor, and the way he keeps checking his watch screams guilt. A young couple approaches, asking if the water's safe to drink. "I'm not that kind of doctor," he snaps, brushing them off, but his voice cracks and he turns away, pretending to study a tacky seashell sculpture. His fingers tap the briefcase rhythmically, like he's trying to calm himself, but the faint tremor in his hands betrays him. Talia Gray, the hotel's concierge, moves through the chaos with an eerie calm that doesn't quite fit. She's 33, with a warm smile that usually puts guests at ease, but tonight there's something distant in her eyes. Her navy blazer's sleeves are rolled up, and she's guiding stragglers toward the exits, her voice steady. "This way, please. Stay together." A family with 2 kids trails her, and she kneels to tie a little girl's shoe, offering a reassuring nod. But as she stands, she hums a soft, haunting tune under her breath, barely audible over the sirens. She doesn't even realize she's doing it, doesn't know where the melody came from. Nightmares of drowning have plagued her for years, vivid enough to leave her gasping when she wakes, but she's never told anyone. A guest bumps into her, apologizing, and Talia blinks, snapping out of her daze. "It's fine," she says, her smile flickering, and she keeps moving, her polished shoes clicking against the floor. The 5 of them, Lila, Marcus, Sophia, Alan, and Talia, are strangers, but fate's about to pull them together in a way none of them could have seen coming. The lobby's thinning out now, the last guests spilling into the street when it happens. A deafening clang echoes through the hotel, like a giant hammer striking metal. The steel shutters over the windows and doors slam down with a force that rattles the walls, sealing the place tight. The chandeliers above sway, their crystals tinkling like wind chimes in a storm. Lila spins around, her camera still rolling, capturing the shutter's descent. "What the hell?" she breathes, her voice barely audible over the crowd's gasps. Marcus rushes to the main entrance, pounding his fist against the shutter. It doesn't budge. "System's jammed!" he shouts, his face reddening as he tries the override panel, punching in codes that do nothing. Sophia freezes, her breath hitching. "This isn't normal," she says, her voice small, clutching Mia's bracelet like it's the only thing keeping her grounded. Alan's still by the sculpture, but he stopped tapping his briefcase, his eyes wide as he stares at the shutters. "This wasn't supposed to happen," he mutters, so low no one hears. Talia's at the front desk now, flipping through a manual, her fingers shaking slightly. "The emergency protocol shouldn't do this," she says, loud enough for the others to catch. It's like something else triggered it. Then a new sound cuts through the tension, a low, rhythmic pulse, deep and resonant, like a heartbeat echoing from the walls themselves. The chandeliers tremble again, their light casting jittery shadows across the marble. Lila lowers her camera, her eyes drawn to a faucet at the lobby's bar, where a single drop of water hangs, catching the light. It shimmers, not like water but like liquid metal, glinting with an unnatural sheen. Another drop falls, then another, and Lila steps closer, mesmerized. The water seems to move, curling slightly toward her outstretched finger. She jerks her hand back, her pulse racing. "Did you see that?" she says, turning to the others, but they're distracted, their faces pale. The hotel's PA system crackles to life, and a distorted lullaby spills out, its notes warped and jagged, like it's being played underwater. The sound claws at their nerves, making Sophia flinch and Marcus grit his teeth. "Shut that damn thing off!" he snaps, storming to the front desk, but Talia's already there, jabbing buttons on the console. "It's not responding," she says, her voice tight. The lullaby loops, growing louder, the melody twisting into something that feels alive, predatory. Marcus, his patience fraying, spots something on the floor near the desk, a guest's phone, its screen cracked but glowing. He picks it up and his stomach drops. The phone's looping a video, some shaky footage of a man in a hotel room staring at a sink. The man's face is slack, his eyes wide, whispering, "It's singing to me." The sink's faucet drips, the water shimmering just like the one Lila saw. Then the man's face freezes, and the screen shatters in Marcus's hand, the glass cutting his palm. He curses, dropping it, blood trickling between his fingers. "What is this place?" he growls, wrapping his hand in a napkin from the desk. Lila's not listening. She's at the front desk now, flipping through the hotel's guest book, her journalist instincts kicking in. The pages are filled with entries from the past week, all in the same looping handwriting, each one praising the song of the deep. The words make her skin crawl, like she's reading a cult's manifesto. She turns to the last page and her breath catches. The final entry, dated today, is in Sofia's name. Sofia Alvarez, it reads, the ink still wet. Sofia, who's been hovering nearby, peers over her shoulder and goes pale. "I didn't write that," she stammers, stepping back. "I swear, I've never even touched this book." Her voice cracks, and she looks at the others, pleading. "You believe me, right?" Marcus, still nursing his cut hand, grunts. "Doesn't matter who wrote it, something's wrong here." Alan's silent, his gaze fixed on the floor, like he's trying to disappear. Talia stopped messing with the PA system, her hands frozen on the console, the lullaby still droning. The pulse in the walls grows louder now, vibrating in their chests, a rhythm that feels like it's burrowing into their bones. Lila slams the guest book shut, her eyes darting between the others. "This isn't just a lockdown," she says, her voice steady despite the fear in her gut. "Something's in here with us." The air shifts, heavier now, carrying an acrid tang that stings their noses. The shutters rattle, like something's testing them from the outside, and the lullaby warps into a low, guttural hum. They're not just trapped in the Azure Wave Hotel. They're caught in something alive, something that knows their names, their fears, their secrets. And it's only just beginning to sing. The group exchanges glances, their breaths shallow, as the pulse thrums louder, pulling them toward whatever's waiting in the dark. They don't know it yet, but the hotel's security room is their next stop, a place where the truth about this nightmare might start to unravel, if they can survive long enough to find it. The Azure Wave Hotel felt like it was closing in on them, the air growing heavier, like they were breathing through a damp cloth. The group stumbled into the security room, a cramped, windowless space tucked behind the lobby, its walls lined with flickering monitors and a desk cluttered with coffee-stained manuals. The acrid stench hit them hard, a mix of burnt plastic and something sharper, almost chemical, that made their throats itch. The pulse from the walls was still there, that deep, rhythmic thud vibrating through the floor, sinking into their bones. It was louder now, more insistent, like the hotel itself was alive and watching them. Leila Torres shoved the door shut behind them, her camera slung over her shoulder, her dark eyes scanning the room for anything that could explain what was happening. "This place is a cage," she said, her voice low but steady, like she was trying to convince herself as much as the others. "We need answers, now." She zeroed in on the security console, a hulking mess of wires and blinking lights, and slid into the chair, her fingers already dancing across the keyboard. Lila wasn't just a journalist. She'd learned a few tricks from a hacker friend back in her early reporting days, enough to crack basic systems. Come on," she muttered, her brow furrowed as she bypassed the hotel's laughably weak password. Someone had left it as Azure 123. The screen flickered, and a folder marked Restricted popped up, locked behind encryption. Lila's heart raced, her instincts screaming that this was the key. She plugged in a USB drive from her bag, running a decryption script, her eyes flicking between the screen and the door. The others hovered nearby, their breaths shallow, the pulse in the walls seeming to sync with their heartbeats. Marcus Reed paced by the door, his boots scuffing the worn linoleum, sweat beading on his forehead despite the room's chill. His security uniform was damp under the arms, and his hand kept drifting to the radio clipped to his belt, even though he knew it was useless. He pressed the button again, the static crackling like a swarm of insects. "Base, this is Reed. Anyone copy?" Nothing but white noise. He cursed under his breath, his gruff voice rougher than usual. His hand shook as he adjusted the dial, and for a moment he froze, a blank look crossing his face. His son's name, Ethan, slipped from his mind, like a word on the tip of his tongue. "What the?" he whispered, shaking his head, trying to grab onto the memory. The pulse thudded louder, and he gripped the radio tighter, his knuckles whitening. "This place is messing with my head," he growled, loud enough for the others to glance over. Sofia Alvarez sat on the edge of the desk, her knees pulled up, clutching her sister's beaded bracelet so tightly the colors blurred in her grip. Her sneakers were still damp from the lobby's marble floor, and her dark hair fell over her face as she stared at the ground. "I can't just sit here," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, laced with a quiet strength that kept her from breaking. "Mia's out there somewhere." I need to look again. Before anyone could stop her, she slid off the desk and slipped out the door, back toward the lobby. The others called after her, but Sophia moved fast, her heart pounding as she retraced her steps. The lobby was eerily quiet now, the sirens outside muffled by the steel shutters. Her sneakers squeaked as she scanned the floor, her eyes catching on something glinting near the bar, a flash of color in a shallow puddle by the faucet Lila had noticed earlier. It was Mia's bracelet, the one Sophia had made for her last summer, its beads unmistakable. "Mia," she whispered, hope flaring in her chest. She knelt, reaching for it, but the moment her fingers touched the puddle, a searing pain shot through her hand, sharp and unnatural, like she'd plunged it into boiling oil. She yanked her hand back, gasping, the bracelet slipping from her grasp. The skin on her fingers was red, blistering, and the pain throbbed in time with the pulse in the walls. Then, soft and clear, she heard it. Mia's voice, not from the room, but inside her head. "Join the song, Sophia," it pleaded, sweet and desperate. Sophia stumbled back, her breath hitching, her eyes wide as she clutched her burned hand to her chest. The puddle shimmered, its surface rippling like it was alive, and she swore she saw Mia's face flicker in it for a split second. "No, no, no," she stammered, backing away, hiding her hand behind her back as she hurried back to the security room. She didn't tell the others, couldn't, her mind racing with fear and guilt. What was that voice? Why did it feel so real? Back in the security room, Marcus was trying to shake off his own unease. He leaned over the sink in the corner, a rusty little thing meant for washing coffee mugs, and splashed cold water on his face, hoping it'd clear his head. The water felt wrong, too slick, like it was coating his skin instead of washing it away. He squinted at the cracked mirror above the sink, and his reflection blurred, the edges of his face softening, like he was looking through fogged glass. For a moment he couldn't remember Ethan's birthday, July 12th, a date he'd never forgotten, not even during his worst benders. "Get it together, man," he muttered, gripping the sink's edge, his voice hoarse. The pulse thudded in his ears, and he turned away, shaking water from his hands, refusing to look back at the mirror. Talia Gray stood by the monitors, her arms crossed, her warm smile from earlier gone. Her navy blazer was slightly askew, and her fingers tapped nervously against her elbow. She was humming again, that same haunting lullaby from the PA system, the notes slipping out unconsciously. The sound was soft, almost soothing, but it sent a chill down Lila's spine. Lila's head snapped up from the console, her eyes narrowing. "Talia, stop that," she said, sharper than she meant. Talia blinked, her humming cutting off mid-note, her face flushing. "Sorry, I didn't realize I was doing it," she said, her voice small, her eyes distant, like she was trying to remember something just out of reach. She rubbed her temples, her fingers trembling slightly, and stepped away from the monitors, her polished shoes clicking on the floor. Alan Kessler was backed into a corner, literally and figuratively, his briefcase clutched to his chest like a shield. The others had started asking questions, pointed ones, about the spill, the shutters, the pulse. His smug demeanor was cracking, his gray suit rumpled now, his tie loosened. "You know something, don't you?" Lila said, not looking up from the console, but her voice cutting like a knife. Alan's mouth opened, then closed, his shifty gaze darting to the door. "I was a consultant, that's all," he snapped, his voice higher than usual. "A military project, years ago. Something about bioluminescent organisms. I didn't know it was alive, I swear." His words spilled out too fast, and Marcus rounded on him, his fists clenched. "You're telling me you worked on this and didn't know?" he growled, stepping closer, his shadow looming over Alan. "Start talking, Doc, or I'll make you." Alan flinched, his briefcase slipping slightly, and he stammered, "I'm not the enemy here. I was just following orders." Before Marcus could press further, a scream tore through the air, high and raw, coming from the hallway outside. The group froze, the pulse in the walls seeming to pause, then surge louder, like it was excited. Lila shoved back from the console, grabbing her camera, while Marcus yanked open the door, his hand on the baton at his belt. They spilled into the hallway, the air colder here, the acrid stench stronger, mixed with something wet and organic, like seaweed left to rot. At the far end, near the elevator, stood a hotel maid, her uniform pristine, but her skin unnaturally pale, almost translucent. Her veins glowed faintly blue, pulsing in time with the heartbeat sound, and her smile was wide, unblinking, wrong. She tilted her head, staring straight at Marcus, and whispered, "Ethan?" The name hit him like a punch, and he staggered back, his face draining of color. The maid lunged, her movements jerky but fast, her fingers outstretched, glowing faintly at the tips. Talia reacted first, grabbing Marcus's arm and yanking him back just as the maid's hand grazed his sleeve. The touch left glowing marks on his uniform, faint blue streaks that pulsed like they were alive. Marcus swore, shaking his arm like he could fling the marks off, his breath ragged. "What the hell was that?" he shouted, but the maid was already retreating, her smile never fading as she slipped around the corner, her footsteps silent. Sophia, who'd just rejoined them, clutched her burned hand tighter, her eyes wide with terror. "That wasn't human," she whispered, her voice trembling, the memory of Mia's voice still echoing in her head. Lila, her heart pounding, darted to the security room's monitors, rewinding the footage. "We need to see what's going on," she said, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her. The screens flickered, and she stopped on a feed from the hotel's pool room. A cavernous space with a glass ceiling and an Olympic-sized pool. The water was still, too still, and floating face down were a dozen guests, their limbs splayed, unmoving. Lila's breath caught, her fingers gripping the console. Then one of the bodies twitched, rolling over slowly, deliberately. Its face turned to the camera, eyes glowing a sickly blue, and it mouthed her name, Lila, clear as day. The screen went black, the feed cutting out with a sharp pop, like a bulb bursting. The group stood frozen, the pulse in the walls pounding louder, faster, like a drum roll building to a climax. Somewhere in the distance, a door creaked. The pool room door, once locked tight, now swinging open. Footsteps echoed, slow and deliberate, splashing through shallow water that shouldn't have been there. The sound grew closer, and the pulse seemed to hum with anticipation, drawing them toward the unknown. Lila exchanged a glance with Marcus, her camera raised, ready to capture whatever was coming. "We can't stay here," she said, her voice firm, but her hands shook as she adjusted the lens. The others nodded, their faces pale, and they moved toward the hallway, the pulse guiding them like a siren's call, straight into the heart of the hotel's nightmare. The hallway outside the security room felt like a trap waiting to spring, the air so thick with that acrid chemical stench it clung to their clothes, their skin, their lungs. The pulse in the walls was relentless now, a deep, rhythmic thud that seemed to tug at their heartbeats, urging them deeper into the Azure Wave Hotel's nightmare. Lila Torres led the group, her camera slung across her chest, its strap digging into her shoulder. Her boots echoed on the tiled floor, each step deliberate, her dark eyes scanning every shadow, every corner. The footsteps from the pool room had faded, but the silence was worse, heavy and expectant, like the hotel was holding its breath. "We need a way out," she said, her voice low but firm, the kind of tone you'd use to talk yourself through a bad dream. "Fire exits, service stairs, anything. Let's move." Marcus Reed took point, his security instincts kicking in despite the fog creeping into his mind. His hand, still stinging from the maid's glowing touch, flexed around his baton, the glowing marks on his arm pulsing faintly under his sleeve. He'd tried the nearest fire exit, a heavy steel door at the end of the hall, but the handle wouldn't budge. He leaned closer, squinting in the dim emergency lighting, and his stomach twisted. The edges of the door were welded shut, the seams glowing with an unnatural silvery sheen, like molten metal that had hardened mid-flow. He ran his fingers along the weld, half expecting it to burn, but it was cold, slick, almost alive. "This ain't right," he growled, his gruff voice echoing. "No welder did this. Not human, anyway." He slammed his shoulder against the door, once, twice, but it held firm, the impact jarring his bones. "We're boxed in." Sofia Alvarez trailed behind, her sneakers squeaking softly, her burned hand tucked into her sleeve to hide the blisters. The pain throbbed in sync with the pulse, sharp and insistent, and Mia's bracelet felt heavier on her wrist, like it was anchoring her to something she couldn't name. Her wide eyes darted to the walls, where the wallpaper seemed to shimmer faintly, as if tiny veins of light were threading through it. "What about the service stairs?" she asked, her voice small but steady, clinging to hope. "There's got to be a way to the basement. Mia might be there." Marcus glanced back, his jaw tight, but he nodded. Worth a shot, kid, but we stick together. Talia Gray walked beside Sophia, her polished shoes clicking, her navy blazer now creased from the night's chaos. Her warm smile was gone, replaced by a nervous energy that made her fingers twitch. She'd been quiet since the security room, but now she spoke, her voice trembling, like she was confessing a sin. "I saw something earlier," she said, her eyes fixed on the floor. "Before the shutters came down, the hotel manager, he was in the maintenance room pouring something into the air vents. It was shimmering like liquid starlight. I thought it was cleaning fluid, but now—" She trailed off, her breath hitching. Lila stopped dead, turning to face her. "You're just telling us this now?" she snapped, her journalist instincts flaring. Talia flinched, her hands rising defensively. "I didn't know it mattered. He's my boss. I thought he was fixing something." Marcus muttered a curse, rubbing his temple, the pulse in the walls seeming to mock their argument. Alan Kessler lingered at the back, his gray suit rumpled, his briefcase clutched so tightly his knuckles were white. His smug demeanor was fraying, his shifty gaze flicking to the ceiling, the floor, anywhere but the other's eyes. "We're wasting time," he said, his voice clipped, but there was a tremor in it, like he was trying to convince himself. "The service stairs are past the ballroom. It's our only shot." Lila shot him a look, her eyes narrowing. "And you're so eager to move because, what? You know something else you're not telling us?" Alan's mouth twitched, but he didn't answer, his silence louder than words. The group reached the double doors to the ballroom, their gold-trimmed handles glinting under the flickering sconces. The pulse was louder here, vibrating through the floor, and a low hum seeped through the doors, not mechanical but alive, like a choir warming up. Marcus pushed the doors open, and the sight inside stole their breath. The ballroom was vast, its mirrored walls reflecting 1,000 fractured versions of themselves, its ceiling dripping with chandeliers that swayed slightly, their crystals catching the dim light. Rows of figures stood in eerie formation, dozens of them, their skin pale, their veins glowing blue, pulsing in perfect sync with the heartbeat sound. These were the thralls, their eyes wide and unblinking, tracking every step the group took. They didn't move, didn't speak, but their hum filled the room, a chorus of stolen voices, weaving fragments of conversations the group recognized. Lila heard her own voice, a snippet from earlier. "This isn't just a lockdown." Marcus caught Ethan's name twisted into a mournful note. Sophia's breath hitched as Mia's laugh echoed, faint but unmistakable. Lila took the lead, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst. She gripped her camera, not filming now, just holding it like a talisman. "Don't look at them," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum. "Just keep moving." The mirrors made it worse, reflecting the thralls' glowing eyes from every angle, their faces distorted into eerie smiles. The chandeliers above cast jittery shadows, and Lila swore she saw shapes in them, clawing hands, twisting fingers, that vanished when she blinked. Her boots sank slightly into the plush carpet, each step feeling like wading through water, the air thick and syrupy. Sophia clutched Mia's bracelet, its beads digging into her palm, and the hum seemed to sync with it, a faint vibration that made her burn throb harder. She kept her eyes on the floor, but the thrall's hum wormed into her head, pulling at memories of Mia, her laugh, her voice, her face. "Stop it," Sophia muttered, squeezing her eyes shut, but the hum only grew louder, more insistent. Marcus stayed close, his baton raised, his glowing marks pulsing brighter under his sleeve. He kept glancing at the thralls, his jaw clenched, like he was daring them to move. Talia's hands trembled, her lips pressed tight, as if she was fighting the urge to hum along. She stayed near Sophia, her presence oddly calming, though her eyes were distant, lost in some private battle. Alan, his arrogance crumbling, pushed forward, his briefcase banging against his leg. "This is nonsense," he snapped, his voice too loud, echoing off the mirrors. "I can reason with it. I worked on the project." He stepped toward the thralls, raising a hand like he was addressing a boardroom. "I made you. I'm Dr. Alan Kessler." His words cut off as the thralls moved, not lunging but flowing, their bodies unnaturally fluid. They swarmed him, their glowing hands sinking into his flesh, melting into it like wax. Alan's screams were muffled, his body twisting, glowing veins spreading across his face as he collapsed into a writhing mass, his briefcase clattering to the floor. The mass pulsed once, twice, then dissolved into a shimmering liquid that seeped into the carpet, leaving nothing behind. Sophia gasped, stumbling back, while Marcus swore, his voice hoarse. "Move now!" he shouted, shoving the group toward the far end of the ballroom. They sprinted, the thrall's hum rising to a deafening roar, the mirrors reflecting 1,000 glowing eyes closing in. Lila's lungs burned, her boots pounding the carpet, her camera swinging wildly. She glanced back and saw a figure among the thralls, taller, dressed like a guest but wrong, his skin rippling, veins glowing faintly, his hum louder, sharper. It was the hotel manager, the one Talia had seen, his face half melted into a grin. He'd been among them all along, blending in, his partial infection letting him pass as human. Marcus saw him too and roared, charging forward, his baton raised. "You son of a—" he started, tackling the manager, but the man slipped free, his body bending unnaturally, his laughter echoing as he melted into the thrall crowd. The service stairwell door loomed ahead, and Lila slammed into it, yanking it open. The group piled through, the door slamming shut behind them with a clang that echoed like a gunshot. But the thralls weren't done. Their hum vibrated through the stairwell, now a guttural roar, and their fingers scraped at the door, the sound like nails on a chalkboard. Lila's heart raced, her mind scrambling for options. The stairwell was narrow, its concrete walls slick with moisture, the pulse pounding louder, shaking the steps. "We can't go back," she said, her voice shaking but resolute. She spotted a vent grate in the wall, rusted but loose, and kicked it hard, the metal clanging as it gave way. "In here!" she shouted, dropping to her knees and crawling inside, the cold metal biting her palms. Sophia followed, her burned hand throbbing, then Talia, her breath hitching, and Marcus, his broad frame barely squeezing through. The vent vibrated with the pulse, the thralls' gurgled whispers echoing behind them. Freedom in the song, over and over, like a promise and a threat. The vent was a tight, suffocating maze, the air stale and metallic, the walls slick with something that wasn't just condensation. Lila led the way, her camera scraping against the metal, her elbows burning as she crawled. The thralls' fingers clawed at the grate they'd left behind, the sound fading but never stopping, a reminder that the hotel wasn't letting them go. The pulse guided them forward, toward the penthouse, where answers, or worse, might be waiting. Sophia's bracelet hummed faintly, Marcus's glowing marks pulsed brighter, and Talia's trembling hands brushed the vent walls, her eyes flickering with something she couldn't name. The hotel was alive, and it was pulling them deeper, its song wrapping around their souls like a noose. The vent spit them out into the penthouse, a sprawling suite that should have felt like a sanctuary, but instead felt like a gilded trap. The air was colder up here, sharp with that same acrid tang, now mixed with something sweeter, almost sickly, like rotting flowers. The pulse in the walls was a living thing, shaking the polished hardwood floor, rattling the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked Miami Beach's glowing, abandoned skyline. Lila Torres scrambled to her feet, her camera smudged with vent grime, her dark hair plastered to her sweaty neck. Her boots left faint prints on the plush rug as she scanned the room. Marble countertops, a sleek bar, a massive TV mounted on the wall, all of it too perfect, too untouched, like a stage set for something awful. "Barricade the door," she said, her voice hoarse but steady, already moving toward a heavy oak dresser. "We don't have much time." Marcus Reed, his broad frame hunched from the crawl, grunted as he dragged a leather sofa across the floor, its legs screeching against the wood. The glowing marks on his arm pulsed brighter now, visible through his torn sleeve, and his face was slick with sweat, his eyes bloodshot. "This ain't gonna hold forever," he muttered, shoving the sofa against the penthouse's double doors, his baton clattering on the bar as he freed his hands. Sofia Alvarez stumbled in behind him, her sneakers slipping on the slick floor, her burned hand clutched to her chest. The blisters had spread, red and angry, and her face was pale, her wide eyes darting to the corners of the room like she expected Mia to step out of the shadows. Talia Gray was the last through the vent, her navy blazer torn at the elbow, her polished shoes scuffed. She stood slowly, her hands trembling, her eyes distant, like she was listening to something the others couldn't hear. They piled furniture against the doors, chairs, a coffee table, even a mini fridge from the bar, until the barricade looked like a desperate art project. But the pulse didn't care, thudding through the walls, the floor, their bones, and then something worse started. Glowing water, shimmering like liquid metal, seeped through cracks in the baseboards, slow and deliberate, pooling on the hardwood. Lila froze, her breath catching as the water twisted, forming spirals that curled into letters, spelling Lila in a looping, elegant script, her mother's handwriting, unmistakable from the letters she'd kept since she was a kid. "No way," she whispered, stepping back, her boots squeaking. The spirals glistened, reflecting the dim light from the chandelier above, and for a moment, she swore she heard her mother's voice, faint and pleading, woven into the pulse. She shook her head, forcing the thought away, and turned to the others. "We need to figure out what this thing is, now." Lila spotted Alan's briefcase, abandoned in the ballroom chaos, now lying near the vent. She grabbed it, popping the locks with a penknife from her pocket, and pulled out a sleek laptop, its screen cracked but still functional. She set it on the bar, her fingers flying over the keys, her journalist instincts in overdrive. "Come on, Kessler, give me something," she muttered, bypassing the login. His password was Choir 1963, arrogant and obvious. A video file caught her eye, time-stamped last month. She clicked it, and the screen flickered to life, showing Alan in a lab, his gray suit pristine, his eyes glowing faintly blue. He was pouring a shimmering liquid into a water tank, the same liquid they'd seen everywhere, and then he drank it, grinning like a man who just won the lottery. His voice crackled through the speakers. "The choir's perfect. It's alive, and it's ours." The video cut to a map of Miami's water supply, red lines marking every pipe, every reservoir. A text overlay flashed, "Containment failed, military quarantine initiated." Lila's stomach dropped. "He did this," she said, her voice shaking with rage. "He poisoned the city and they locked us in to die." Marcus, leaning against the barricade, slammed his fist into the sofa. "That bastard," he growled, his voice thick with anger. But there was something else, confusion, like he was grasping for a memory that wasn't there. The glowing marks on his arm pulsed faster, and he rubbed his eyes, muttering, "Why can't I?" Sophia, sitting on the floor now, her knees pulled up, didn't look at the laptop. Her burn was worse, the blisters spreading up her wrist, and Mia's voice was louder in her head, clear and urgent. "Open the vents, Sophia. Let it in." She squeezed her eyes shut, clutching Mia's bracelet, its beads digging into her palm. "You're not real," she whispered, rocking slightly, but the voice only grew sweeter, more insistent, promising safety, promising Mia. She glanced at the air vent above the bar, its grill loose, and her fingers twitched, like they wanted to move on their own. Talia stood by the windows, her reflection faint in the glass, her face pale, her lips trembling. The pulse seemed to hum through her, and she turned to the others, her voice barely above a whisper. "I need to tell you something," she said, her hands twisting together, her polished nails chipped. "My nightmares, the drowning, the voices, they started years ago, after a job I had with Alan's team. They were testing something, a bioluminescent organism. They said I was a control subject, but I think they made me a vessel." Her voice cracked, and she hugged herself, her blazer creasing. "I've been fighting it, the urges to help it. The screws I loosened in the maintenance room, the bottles I left open in the lobby. I didn't mean to, but it was like my hands weren't mine." Lila's eyes narrowed, her hand tightening on the laptop. "You're saying you're part of this?" she asked, her tone sharp but wavering, like she didn't want to believe it. Talia shook her head, tears welling. "I didn't know. I thought I was immune, but it's been using me." Sophia, her heart breaking for Talia, stood and crossed the room, ignoring the pain in her hand. "You're still you," she said, her voice soft but fierce, and wrapped her arms around Talia, pulling her into a hug. Talia's tears fell, hot against Sophia's cheek, and one brushed Sophia's burned hand. The touch burned, not with heat, but with a strange electric jolt, and Sophia gasped, pulling back. Her eyes flickered, just for a second, with a faint blue glow, like a camera flash. Marcus saw it, his face hardening, and he moved fast, grabbing Sophia's arm. "What was that?" he demanded, his voice low, his glowing marks pulsing in sync with the pulse. Sophia shook her head, terrified. "I don't know, I swear." But the hum was in her now, that distorted lullaby from the PA system, spilling from her lips before she could stop it. Marcus didn't hesitate. He pulled her toward the penthouse's bathroom, a sleek marble space with a clawfoot tub, and pushed her inside, slamming the door. "Stay there," he said, his voice shaking as he slid a chair under the handle. From inside, Sophia's nails scratched at the door, slow and rhythmic, her humming growing louder, sweeter, like a siren's call. The penthouse's TV flickered on, unplugged but alive, its screen a mess of static that coalesced into glimpses of faces. Sophia's sister, Mia, her hair wet, standing in glowing water. Marcus's son, Ethan, his eyes wide, beckoning. The images looped, their voices gurgled and distorted, calling out, "Sophia, Marcus, come to us." The thralls outside pounded the barricade, their fists like thunder, their gurgled voices slipping through the cracks, naming each of them. Lila, Marcus, Talia, Sophia. The furniture groaned, the sofa sliding an inch, and Lila's heart raced, her eyes darting to Talia. She noticed it then. Talia's hands, trembling harder, her veins faintly glowing, pulsing blue under her skin. The truth hit like a freight train. Talia wasn't just a victim. She was the choir's anchor, the one tying it to the hotel, to them. Her immunity was crumbling, and the pulse seemed to hum with triumph. Lila backed away, her camera raised like a shield, her voice steady despite the fear. "Talia, what's happening to you?" she asked, but Talia only shook her head, her eyes wide, glowing faintly now, like twin moons. The pounding grew louder, the glowing water pooling deeper, the spirals spelling Lila again and again. Marcus grabbed his baton, his glowing marks spreading up his arm, his face a mask of rage and fear. The barricade buckled, wood splintering, and the thralls' rough, gurgled chants filled the room, promising freedom, promising the song. The penthouse was a death trap, and the choir was closing in, its voice wrapping around them like a tide, pulling them toward the abyss. The penthouse was drowning, the glowing water rising fast, swirling across the hardwood like a living whirlpool, its spiral patterns twisting and pulsing with an unnatural light. The air was thick, heavy with that sickly sweet rot, and the pulse in the walls was a relentless drum, shaking the chandelier above until its crystals clinked like bones. Lila Torres stood by the bar, her boots half submerged, her camera dangling from its strap, useless now in the chaos. Her dark eyes darted between the buckling barricade and Talia Gray, who was slumped against the wall, her veins glowing brighter, blue light threading under her skin like a map of rivers. The thralls' pounding was deafening, their gurgled chants, Lila, Talia, Marcus, slipping through the splintering doors, each name a hook in their souls. Lila's heart pounded, her mother's handwriting still shimmering in the water, spelling her name in endless loops. "We're running out of time," she said, her voice raw, barely audible over the pulse. "We need a plan now." Marcus Reed was unraveling, his glowing marks spreading up his arm, across his chest, pulsing in sync with the hotel's heartbeat. His security uniform was soaked, clinging to his broad frame, and his face was a mask of rage and confusion. He'd forgotten Ethan's face entirely, the memory of his son's eyes, his smile, erased like a chalkboard wiped clean. "No, no, no," he muttered, his gruff voice breaking as he clutched his head, his fingers digging into his scalp. The pulse seemed to mock him, thudding louder, and he roared, a primal sound that cut through the chaos. His eyes landed on the bathroom door, where Sophia's humming still echoed, her nails scratching like a trapped animal. "Sophia!" he shouted, shoving the chair aside and smashing the door open with his shoulder, the wood splintering under his weight. The bathroom was empty, the clawfoot tub slick with glowing water, the window above it shattered, glass glinting on the marble floor. A cold wind whipped through, carrying the salty tang of the ocean, and Marcus leaned out, his hands gripping the frame. On the balcony below, Sophia stood, her sneakers balanced on the edge, her burned hand glowing faintly, her eyes a blazing blue. She smiled, a serene, unnatural smile, and whispered, "We're free." Before Marcus could shout, she stepped off, her body falling into the swarm of thralls below, their pale arms catching her like a tide, their glowing veins pulsing as they carried her into the dark. Marcus staggered back, his breath ragged, his glowing marks burning hotter. "Damn it!" he growled, slamming his fist into the wall, the plaster cracking. "Not her, too." He turned, his eyes wild, and spotted a fire axe mounted in a glass case by the penthouse's bar. He smashed the glass with his elbow, shards scattering, and grabbed the axe, its weight solid in his hands. "I'm ending this," he said, his voice low, half-infected but still his own. He glanced at Lila, who was shoving Alan's laptop into her bag, her face pale but determined. "The basement," he said. "Main water valve. If I flood this place with seawater, it might dilute whatever this thing is." Lila nodded, her jaw tight. "Go, we'll hold here." Marcus didn't wait, charging toward the stairwell door, his boots splashing through the rising water, the axe gleaming in the chandelier's light. The stairwell was a death trap, its concrete steps slick with glowing water, the walls trembling with the pulse. Marcus descended, his breath heaving, the glowing marks on his skin crawling like insects. Halfway down, the steps shuddered, then collapsed, the thrall's weight above crushing the structure. Their elongated limbs cracked as they scaled the walls, their glowing eyes fixed on him, their gurgled screams echoing. Marcus leapt across the gap, his boots skidding on the next landing, the axe nearly slipping from his grip. "Come on!" he roared, swinging at a thrall that lunged from the shadows, its mouth stretched into an eerie smile. The blade sank into its shoulder, and it dissolved into shimmering liquid, splashing the walls. He kept moving, leaping gaps, dodging claws until he reached the basement, a cavernous space of rusted pipes and humming machinery. The main water valve loomed, a massive steel wheel crusted with salt. Marcus gripped it, his muscles straining, but it wouldn't budge. The thralls were closing in, their footsteps splashing, their hum a deafening roar. He swung the axe instead, smashing the valve's pipe, seawater exploding in a torrent, flooding the basement. The thralls shrieked, their glowing veins flickering, and Marcus felt the pulse weaken just for a moment. But they adapted, their limbs twisting, their screams turning wet and triumphant as they dragged him under, their cold hands wrapping around his arms, his throat. He fought, swinging the axe, but the water rose and his glowing marks blazed, his last thought a flicker of Ethan's name lost forever as the tide consumed him. Back in the penthouse, Lila and Talia felt the flood, the water surging higher, the spiral pattern swirling faster, like a storm's eye. The pulse faltered, and Lila's heart lifted. Marcus had done it. "It's working," she whispered, her boots sloshing as she grabbed Talia's arm. But the hope died fast. The pulse surged back, louder, angrier, shaking the walls until the chandelier crashed to the floor, crystals shattering. The thralls had adapted, their hum now a guttural chant, and the barricade gave way, the doors bursting open in a spray of splintered wood. Thralls poured in, their faces contorted, mouths stretched into eerie, dripping smiles, their glowing veins pulsing like a heartbeat. Their gurgled voices filled the room, wet and hungry, calling Lila and Talia in a chorus that clawed at their minds. Talia was collapsing, her veins glowing so brightly they lit the room, her body trembling as she sank to her knees, the water lapping at her waist. "Leave me," she whispered, her voice breaking, her eyes flickering between human and something else. I'm theirs." Lila shook her head, her heart racing, and grabbed Talia's shoulders, pulling her up. "Not happening," she said, her voice fierce, her hands shaking as she dragged Talia toward the penthouse's roof access, a narrow hatch in the ceiling. The thralls closed in, their fingers grazing Lila's jacket, their hum a deafening roar. She kicked a chair under the hatch, climbing up and yanking it open, the night air rushing in, salty and cold. She hauled Talia through, the other woman's weight heavy, her glowing veins searing Lila's hands like a brand. On the roof, the ocean stretched below, a living canvas of bioluminescent horror, its glowing streaks twisting into shapes, faces, hands, eyes, watching them. The pulse vibrated in Lila's skull, a scream she couldn't shake, and Talia's breathing was ragged, her body slumping against the rooftop's edge. "You should have left me," Talia whispered, her voice faint, her glowing eyes locked on the water below. Lila gripped her arm, her own hands trembling, her mother's letter crumpled in her pocket, its weight heavier than ever. The thralls' hum echoed from the hatch, their footsteps climbing, and the hotel groaned like a dying beast, its song pulling them toward the end. The roof of the Azure Wave Hotel was a windswept battleground, the night air biting and thick with the salty tang of the ocean below. The pulse was a deafening roar now, not just in the walls but in the air, in their blood, a relentless drum that shook the gravel beneath their feet. Lila Torres staggered toward the hotel's radio tower, a rusted metal spire jutting from the roof's edge, its antenna swaying in the gusts. Her boots crunched on loose pebbles, her dark hair whipping across her face, stinging her eyes. The camera hung uselessly from her shoulder, its lens cracked, and her hands trembled, clutching her mother's letter in her pocket, its paper worn soft from years of handling. Her vision blurred, the pulse pounding in her skull like a migraine, but she pushed forward, her jaw clenched. "Not yet," she muttered, her voice raw, like she was talking to the hotel itself. "You don't get to win." Talia Gray leaned against the roof's low wall, her body slumping, her navy blazer torn and soaked with glowing water. Her veins blazed blue, lighting her face like a lantern, and her eyes, fully infected, glowed with an eerie calm. She hummed softly, that distorted lullaby from the PA system, the notes weaving into the pulse, but her human side clung on, fragile and fading. Her trembling hands gripped the wall, her chipped nails scraping the concrete, and she stared at Lila, her voice barely a whisper. "You can't save me," she said, her words slurring like she was fighting to form them. "It's in me, all of it." Lila shook her head, her boots splashing through shallow pools of glowing water that had seeped onto the roof. "I'm not leaving you," she said, her voice fierce, but her eyes were wet, betraying the fear clawing at her chest. The thrall's hum echoed from the hatch, their footsteps climbing their gurgled chants, Leela, Talia, growing louder, closer. The ocean below was a nightmare canvas, its bioluminescent streaks twisting into shapes that seemed to watch them, faces and eyes forming and dissolving in the waves. Lila reached the radio, a battered box of dials and wires, its microphone dangling by a frayed cord. She grabbed it, her fingers slipping on the cold metal, and flipped switches, praying it still worked. Static crackled, sharp and angry, but she leaned in, her voice cracking as she spoke. "This is Lila Torres, broadcasting from the Azure Wave Hotel in Miami Beach. The choir's in the water. It's alive, sentient, spreading. It's not a spill, it's a weapon. Quarantine Miami now." Her words tumbled out, raw and desperate, her breath hitching as she gripped the mic tighter. "Don't drink the water. Don't touch it. It knows your name." The radio spat back static, then something worse, her mother's voice, soft and pleading, cutting through the noise. "Stay, Leela, stay. Be with me." Leela's heart stopped, her hand freezing on the mic. She yanked the plug from its socket, the cord snapping free, but the voice kept going, looping through the static, now joined by others. Sophia's, Marcus's, voices of people she'd lost, promising peace, promising home. She stumbled back, her boots slipping, her vision swimming. "Shut up!" she shouted, her voice breaking, tears streaming down her face. The pulse surged, vibrating in her bones, and she clutched her mother's letter, its ink smudged but its words clear in her mind. "You're stronger than the tide." Talia's humming grew louder, her glowing eyes locked on Lila, but she forced out words, her voice a strained whisper. "Do it, Lila. End it." Her hand reached out, trembling, and touched Lila's arm, the contact searing like a brand, but her eyes were human for a moment, pleading. Lila nodded, swallowing hard, and turned to the roof's maintenance hatch, where gas lines snaked into the hotel's core. She'd seen the valves in the penthouse, rusted but functional, and her journalist's mind pieced it together. A spark, a blaze, a chance to burn the choir's nexus to ash. She grabbed a wrench from a nearby toolbox, its handle cold and heavy, and pried open the hatch, her hands shaking as she twisted the gas valves wide open. The hiss of escaping gas filled the air, sharp and chemical, mixing with the pulse's hum. The thralls were at the hatch now, their glowing hands clawing through, their contorted faces leering, mouths stretched into dripping smiles. Lila backed toward the radio tower, her boots crunching gravel, her fingers fumbling in her pocket for the matchbook she'd grabbed from the penthouse bar. The choir's voice was a chorus now, not just in the radio but in her head, weaving together everyone she'd lost. Her mother, Sophia, Marcus, even her childhood dog, promising rest, promising an end to the fight. Her hand froze, the matchbook slipping, and for a moment she faltered, tears blurring the glowing ocean below. "It'd be so easy," she whispered, her voice barely audible, the pulse wrapping around her like a warm tide. Talia's voice cut through, faint but clear. "Lila, now!" Lila blinked, her mother's letter crinkling in her pocket, and she gritted her teeth. "Not today," she whispered, striking a match, its flame small but fierce. She tossed it into the gas-soaked hatch, and the world erupted. A fireball roared through the hotel, the pulse silenced in a deafening blast, the flames consuming the roof, the thralls, the glowing water. Lila's silhouette vanished in the inferno, the heat searing her last breath, her mother's letter clutched to her chest. The Azure Wave Hotel became a pyre, its blaze lighting the Miami skyline. The choir's nexus burned to nothing, or so it seemed. Hours later, dawn broke over a quiet sea, the Coast Guard ship Vigilant cutting through the waves miles from shore. In the mess hall, a grainy TV played a news report, the anchor's voice clipped and urgent. A mysterious broadcast from Miami Beach is trending on X, warning of a living organism in the water. Authorities are investigating, but the source, a journalist named Lila Torres, is presumed dead in a hotel explosion. The screen flickered to X posts, frantic and viral, reporting glowing water in distant cities. London's Thames, Tokyo's bays, Sydney's harbors. A sailor, young and bleary-eyed, sipped from a plastic bottle, his lips smacking as he drained it. He didn't notice the faint blue glow in his veins, pulsing softly under his skin, or the way his fingers twitched, humming a tune he didn't know. The other sailors laughed over their coffee, oblivious, their radios crackling with routine chatter. The camera panned to the ocean, its surface calm but alive, bioluminescent streaks weaving through the depths. They twisted, deliberate and slow, forming a massive, shifting eye, its gaze fixed on the horizon. The choir was weakened, its heart scorched in the flames, but its song endured, spreading silently through pipes, bottles, rivers, seas. The sailor set his bottle down, its last drops shimmering, and the eye in the water blinked, patient, eternal, waiting for the world to sing. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more creepy stories. Stay safe, and see you in the next nightmare.